For my 18th birthday, my parents threw a huge party just to announce I was adopted and homeless in front of everyone. They expected tears. They got a smile because I knew their secret would cost them everything. For as long as I can remember, our house has had its own set of physics. It wasn't governed by gravity or thermodynamics, but by the silent, invisible force of my younger brother Leo's happiness. His contentment was the sun, and my parents, Sharon and Mark, along with myself, were the planets trapped in its orbit, our own needs and temperatures dictated by his whims. I, being the farthest planet, was perpetually in the cold. I learned to navigate this reality with the careful, quiet steps of someone who knows they are a guest in their own home. I learned that my needs were measured in whispers, while Leo's were announced with trumpets. This truth was never spoken, of course. It was simply lived, breathed, and absorbed into the drywall and the floorboards. The lesson was never clearer than the Tuesday the living room TV died. It gasped its last breath in a fizzle of green pixels during Mark's favorite game show. The tragedy was monumental. A house without a central screen for entertainment was, apparently, a house on the brink of collapse. The very next day, a van arrived. Two men in blue uniforms carefully unboxed a 65-inch 4K television, a sleek black mirror of technological perfection. Leo, who was 14, had declared the old TV ancient anyway. He was given a new one for his room, a reward for his suffering through a single evening of TV-less boredom. His whoops of joy echoed through the hall as my parents beamed, their faces glowing with the pride of expert providers. Meanwhile, my laptop, a machine essential for my high school senior projects, had been broken for a month. Its screen flickered with the frantic, dying energy of a captured moth. My requests for a repair, or even a modest replacement, were met with sighs and the familiar, deflating phrase, "We'll see, Clara. Money doesn't grow on trees." I would nod, retreat to my room, and try to coax another hour of life out of the dying machine, the injustice a hard, bitter stone in my gut. I learned to swallow those stones. They became a part of my foundation. My survival strategy was simple. Be invisible, be undemanding, be good. I got straight A's. I did my chores without being asked. I never complained. I folded my own desires into tiny, neat squares and tucked them away, hoping that one day my quiet compliance would be seen, tallied, and finally rewarded with the affection that flowed so effortlessly toward Leo. So when Sharon and Mark announced they were throwing me a massive 18th birthday party, a part of me, the young, stupid, hopeful part one couldn't seem to kill, flared to life. It was so shockingly out of character that it felt like a miracle. They had never celebrated my birthday beyond a lone cupcake and a practical gift, like a new set of socks or a sensible winter coat. "You're only 18 once," Sharon had chirped, her arm wrapped around my shoulders in a display of affection so rare it felt like a stage performance. Her smile was brilliant, but it was a stranger to her eyes. Mark clapped me on the back, his hand heavy and awkward. Time to celebrate our little girl becoming a woman. Leo, lounging on the couch and scrolling through his phone, snorted. "Don't get used to it," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I ignored him. I chose instead to water that tiny, stupid seed of hope. Maybe this was it, the turning point, the grand gesture that would finally, officially, welcome me into the warm center of the family. I allowed myself to dream about it, to imagine the toasts, the gifts, the feeling of being, for one day, the sun in our family solar system. A week before the party, the phone rang. It was my grandmother, Evelyn. My mother had kept us apart for years, citing Evelyn's negativity and toxic influence. In reality, Evelyn was the only person who ever looked at me like I was a person and not a problem to be managed. We spoke in secret, our calls brief and filled with the coded language of the oppressed. This time, her voice was different. It was warm as always, but laced with an urgency that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "Clara, honey, you need to listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice a low murmur. "A performance is about to begin, and you're the star, just not in the way you think. Your mother, she doesn't operate from the heart. She operates from a ledger. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the receiver. "I'm sending you a package," she continued. "It's your armor. Don't you dare open it until you have to. But when the time comes, you'll know. I should have done more, sooner, and that's a regret I'll live with. But now it's time for you to be brave." The line clicked dead. 2 days later, a small, discreetly padded envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to me in Evelyn's elegant, slanted script. I snatched it before anyone else could see it and took it to my room. It felt heavier than it should. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew it was the truth. I hid it at the bottom of my closet, beneath a stack of old yearbooks. The weight of it was a strange comfort. It was a secret, a power, a hidden card. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a pawn in their game. I was a player. The day of the party arrived, wrapped in the brilliant, deceptive sunshine of a perfect Saturday in late May. Our backyard was transformed. White tents were erected, string lights twinkled between the trees, and a caterer I'd never seen before arranged platters of food that looked too beautiful to eat. Neighbors, distant relatives, and my parents' work friends mingled on the lawn, their laughter a bright, festive sound that felt completely alien in our tense home. I moved through the crowd in a simple blue dress I'd bought with my own money from my part-time job at the library. I felt like an actor in a play I hadn't read the script for. People I barely knew hugged me, wishing me a happy birthday, their smiles wide and genuine. They saw the perfect picture my parents had painted, the loving family celebrating their cherished daughter's rite of passage. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Sharon was a vision of maternal pride, her hand constantly on my arm, guiding me from one group of guests to another. "This is our Clara," she would say, her voice brimming with manufactured emotion. "We're so proud of the young woman she's become." Mark played his part, too, the bluff, hearty father, telling exaggeratedly fond stories of my childhood that I barely recognized as my own. It was a masterful performance. I watched them, a strange detachment settling over me, and I thought of Evelyn's words, "A performance is about to begin." As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn, Mark clinked a champagne flute with a knife. The cheerful chatter subsided. A hush fell over the 50 or so guests. This was it, the main event. He and Sharon stood in the center of the patio, their arms wrapped around me, pulling me into a tight, theatrical family hug. I could smell Sharon's cloyingly sweet perfume and feel the uncomfortable stiffness in her posture. "We want to thank you all for coming," Mark began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "It means the world to us to share this milestone. 18 years. It goes by in a flash." He paused for effect, squeezing my shoulder. "We've raised Clara to be strong, to be independent." Sharon took over, her voice as smooth and cool as glass. "And as most of you know, we took Clara in when she was just a baby. We opened our home and our hearts. We did our duty as her guardians." A murmur of appreciative ahs rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen between them, a prop in their final act. "And now," Sharon continued, her smile tightening just a fraction, "that she's a legal adult, our financial and legal obligations are fulfilled. It's time for her to stand on her own 2 feet and experience the real world." She turned to me, her eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. "Her bags are packed and waiting by the door. We wish you the best, Clara." The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was absolute, deafening. It was the sound of 50 people's smiles freezing and shattering at once. I could feel their collective shock, their disbelief, their pity. All of it was aimed at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leo. He was standing near the grill, a smirk of pure, triumphant pleasure on his face. He had known. He had been waiting for this. The world dropped out from under me. The roar in my ears was so loud, I could barely hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in my throat. This was their plan all along. The party, the guests, the public stage, it was all designed for maximum cruelty, to sever me from them in the most brutal way imaginable, leaving me with no dignity, no support, no one to turn to. But then, through the roaring static, a voice cut through. "It's your armor. Don't use it until they try to take away your crown." Evelyn's words. Something inside me shifted. The frantic, terrified girl receded, and in her place stood someone else. Someone colder, calmer, stronger. The performance was over. My role was done. I took a single, deep breath. I gently extricated myself from their grasp and turned to face them. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, then my father's, and I smiled. It wasn't a big smile or a happy one. It was a small, sharp, chillingly calm smile that didn't touch my eyes. "Thank you," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was as quiet and steady as a blade. "For this final gift. You've given me clarity. I truly appreciate it." I didn't wait for their response. I turned my back on them, on the stunned faces of their friends, on the entire elaborate stage of my own execution. I walked across the lawn, my steps even and measured. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't falter. I walked past the two small, neatly packed suitcases they had left by the front door. A final, insulting gesture of their supposed care. I picked them up. They were surprisingly light. And without a single backward glance, I walked out of the house that had never been my home, got into my beat-up Honda, and drove away. The adrenaline carried me for 3 blocks. Then, as soon as I turned onto a dark, deserted side street, the facade crumbled. I pulled the car over, the engine idling, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. A storm of pure, undiluted agony ripped through me. It wasn't the slow, creeping sadness I was used to. It was a violent hurricane of rage, of grief, of a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical violation. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes. I didn't scream. I didn't pound the dashboard. I let a single, ragged sob escape, a sound torn from the deepest part of me. I let silent, hot tears stream down my face, washing away the 18 years of lies. I let myself feel it all, every last shred of pain. Then, the 5 minutes were up. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, took a shuddering breath, and put the car in drive. The grief was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but something else was there now, too. Resolve. Hard and cold and clear. I pulled my phone from my purse. My fingers were steady as I scrolled to the only number that mattered. Evelyn answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone, waiting. "They did it, didn't they?" she said, her voice soft. "Yes," I said. A pause. Then, her voice hardened, losing its softness and gaining the strength of steel. "I had a feeling. Don't you worry, my girl. You know my address. You come home, and you bring that package with you. It's time. I'm on my way," I said, and my voice was no longer that of a victim. It was the voice of a soldier answering a call to arms. The drive to Evelyn's house was a journey through a fog of shock and adrenaline. The streetlights blurred into streaks of yellow, and the world outside my car felt distant and unreal. But the moment I pulled into her driveway, the fog began to lift. Her house was small, a modest cottage with a porch swing and pots overflowing with geraniums, but it radiated a warmth that Sharon and Mark's sprawling house had never possessed. The porch light was on, a beacon in the darkness. Evelyn was waiting at the door. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and I walked into them, dropping my bags on the porch. The hug wasn't gentle. It was fierce, strong, the embrace of an anchor holding a ship in a storm. I buried my face in her shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender and cinnamon, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly safe. The tears I'd held back came then. Not the hot tears of rage, but the quiet, wrenching sobs of grief for a childhood I had endured in a family I had finally lost. After I had cried myself out, she led me inside to the kitchen table. A cup of chamomile tea appeared in my hands, its warmth seeping into my frozen fingers. "All right," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's see the armor." I retrieved the padded envelope from my suitcase. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside were several documents, held together by a paperclip. They felt cold and official. Evelyn spread them out on the table under the warm kitchen light. The first was a set of official-looking financial statements. They were records from the state's Family Services Department. Column after column of numbers, dates, and direct deposits. It took me a moment to understand. There were the monthly stipends the government had paid Sharon and Mark for my care. Over 17 years. I did a quick, rough calculation in my head. The total was staggering. Well over $150,000. I wasn't a daughter. I was an income stream, an investment that had just matured. The clinical coldness of it stole my breath. I suspected it from the beginning, Evelyn said softly, her eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. The way she talked about the support she would get. It was never about giving a child a home. But the second document was the real bombshell. It was a legal document, heavy with jargon, but one phrase stood out, underlined in red ink by Evelyn years ago. It was a codicil to the deed of the house I had just left. The house, I learned, had originally belonged to Evelyn. She had gifted it to Sharon and Mark when they married, but her lawyer had insisted on one legally binding condition. The document stated that they must provide a stable home, financial support, and continuous emotional care for me, Clara, until I either graduated from a 4-year college or reached the age of 25, whichever came first. If this contract was breached, ownership of the property would immediately revert to Evelyn. I stared at the paper, my mind reeling. They hadn't just thrown me out. They had violated a legal contract. They had, in their greed and cruelty, handed me the weapon that could destroy them. The next morning, we were in the polished wooden leather office of Ms. Davies, Evelyn's lawyer. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense empathy. She read through the documents, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is ironclad," she said, tapping the codicil with a perfectly manicured finger. "The language is unambiguous. They breached the contract the moment they packed your bags. The house is, by right, your grandmother's." We spent the next hour in what felt like a war room. Ms. Davies outlined our strategy: a lawsuit for breach of contract to reclaim the house, and a separate claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress. But as we talked, a cold, nagging feeling pricked at the back of my mind. It was a vague memory of Mark's recklessness, the way he always seemed to be juggling bills, the casualness with which he'd handled the purchase of my car. "There's something else," I said, interrupting Ms. Davies. My voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. "Mark, he was always careless with money. I have a bad feeling. Could you run a credit check on me? I need to know if he's done anything else." Ms. Davies looked at me, a flicker of surprise and respect in her eyes. "That's a very smart thought, Clara." An hour later, she had the answer. She sat us down, her face grim. "Clara, your intuition was spot on." She slid a credit report across the table. My name was at the top, but the contents were a nightmare. A year ago, a personal loan for $10,000 had been taken out in my name. The address on the application was our home address. The Social Security number was mine. Mark had been making sporadic, minimum payments, just enough to keep it from defaulting, but my credit was already damaged. He had stolen my identity. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was one thing to be neglected, to be unloved. It was another to be actively, criminally plundered by the man I was supposed to trust as a father. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a profound violation. Miss Davies' voice was like ice. "This changes everything. This is no longer just a civil matter. This is fraud, a felony. They didn't just neglect you. They actively stole from you. We have them." The lawsuit was filed 2 days later. Ms. Davies, a brilliant strategist, decided against a quiet serving. She timed it perfectly. She hired a process server and gave him one instruction: deliver the papers to Sharon and Mark's home at 3 p.m. the following Saturday, during Leo's lavish 15th birthday party. I wasn't there to see it, but Mr. Henderson, our kind, elderly neighbor who had already provided a damning affidavit about my treatment, called Evelyn and described the scene in vivid detail. A tall, imposing man walked right up the driveway, past the bouncy castle and the bewildered teenage guests, and handed the thick legal envelope directly to Sharon as she was about to cut the cake. Her face, Mr. Henderson said, went from a mask of festive joy to chalk-white horror in a single second. The party ended abruptly. The phone call started that night. First, it was Sharon, her voice thick with fake, weeping hysteria. "Clara, how could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you, I gave you a home. I loved you. Did you love me, or the checks that came with me? I asked, my voice flat. Then Mark got on the phone, his voice a low, threatening growl. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You drop this right now, or I'll tell everyone in this town what a troubled, disturbed child you really were. I will ruin you. I held the phone steady. On Ms. Davies' advice, I had an app recording the call. Hello, Mark, I said calmly. Any threats you'd like to make should be directed to my attorney, Ms. Davies. I'm sure she'd be very interested to hear them. Have a good night. I hung up. The final act of the war was not a battle, but a negotiation. It took place in a sterile, airless conference room at a neutral law firm. It was a formal mediation, our last chance to settle before going to a full, public trial. I sat across a long, polished table from Sharon and Mark. They looked smaller, older, stripped of their suburban royalty. Sharon's eyes were puffy and red. Mark's face was a mask of sullen rage. Their lawyer blustered, trying to paint me as a vindictive, money-grubbing teenager. I let him talk. It was my turn. I looked past the lawyers, past the mediator, and spoke directly to the two people who had created me and then tried to erase me. My voice was quiet, but it filled the silent room. For 18 years, I began, I operated under the delusion that your love was something I could earn if I was just good enough, quiet enough, invisible enough. I now understand that was impossible. It was impossible because I wasn't your daughter. I was a long-term financial investment. I let that sink in. You aren't losing your house because I'm vengeful. You're losing it because you broke a legally binding contract. Mark isn't facing criminal charges because I'm cruel. He's facing them because he committed a felony using my name. This was never about emotion for you. It was business. So this is me, finally learning to conduct business. I leaned forward slightly. So here are my terms. You will sell the house. A significant portion of the proceeds will be placed in a trust for my education and future. You will pay back every cent of the fraudulent loan and work with my lawyer to have my credit record expunged. You will sign a legal document agreeing to never contact me again. Do this, and I will ask the DA to recommend probation for the fraud charge instead of jail time. Refuse, and I will see you in court. I leaned back, my hands calm in my lap. I looked at their stunned, defeated faces. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt a vast, empty pity. They were hollow, and I was finally free of them. The aftermath was swift and silent. Faced with certain legal ruin and public disgrace, they capitulated completely. They signed everything. The house, the scene of so many quiet humiliations, went on the market. A for sale sign was hammered into the pristine lawn, a public monument to their downfall. Mark pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and as promised, I did not object to the recommendation of probation. His punishment was the crippling restitution and the permanent stain on his name. Their social circle, once the audience for their perfect family pageant, evaporated overnight. They became ghosts in their own town. The most profound consequence, however, was the one I didn't see directly. It was the effect on Leo. Evelyn heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they had moved into a small, cramped apartment across town. The kingdom had fallen, and the young prince was now just a boy in a boxy, two-bedroom rental. One evening, Evelyn told me something Mr. Henderson had shared with her. He'd seen Leo sitting alone on the apartment steps, his shoulders slumped, the arrogant swagger completely gone. The boy who had been the son of his family's universe was now just a kid, forced to witness the true, ugly nature of the parents who had spoiled him. He had watched his world, built on a foundation of lies and my silent sacrifice, crumble into dust. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something for him. Not pity, exactly, but a sad acknowledgement of his own different kind of loss. He was a victim of their poison, too. The years that followed were about construction. I used the settlement money not as a windfall, but as a tool. It was the foundation I was never given, and I refused to waste it. I enrolled in college, choosing to study architecture. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had grown up in a house that was not a home, would now learn to build them. I poured myself into my studies, finding solace and strength in the logic of blueprints, the certainty of load-bearing walls, and the beauty of creating spaces designed for light, for safety, for life. 5 years after that fateful party, I stood on a different kind of stage. It was a dusty construction site, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and fresh earth. I wore a navy blue pantsuit and a white hard hat, my hair tied back in a neat ponytail. A podium had been set up in front of a half-finished building frame. Before me was a small crowd of city officials, donors, and journalists. Evelyn and Ms. Davies were in the front row, their faces shining with a pride that was real and deep and life-affirming. I was the lead architect for the Phoenix Project, a new state-of-the-art shelter and transitional housing facility for at-risk youth, specifically for those aged out of the foster care system or, like me, cast out by their families. It was the most important project of my life, and I had designed it pro bono. I tapped the microphone, my voice steady and clear. A house is just walls and a roof. I began, my eyes scanning the crowd. A home. A home is a place where you are safe to be yourself. It's a place where you are seen and where you are valued. For a long time, I didn't understand the difference. When the walls of my first house fell apart, I was terrified. But then I realized something powerful. I learned that I had the strength, the intelligence, and the right to design and build my own home. I paused, gesturing to the structure behind me. And now, I have the privilege of helping others build theirs. After the applause faded and the handshakes were done, I stepped away for a quiet moment. I pulled out my phone, a habit from years of checking in with Evelyn. And I saw it, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just 2 words, from Leo. My heart gave a single, hard thump. I hesitated for a long moment, then opened it. The message was short, the sentences clipped and awkward, as if written and rewritten a dozen times. Clara, I know I have no right to email you. I just wanted to say, I heard about the project you're doing. I saw it on the news. I'm sorry. For everything. For being a brat. For not seeing what was happening. For that day. You deserve better. I hope you're happy. I read it twice. There was no request for a response. No plea for forgiveness. It was just an acknowledgement. A period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I looked up from my phone at the steel frame of the building climbing toward the sky, strong and full of promise. I didn't feel anger or even the need to forgive. What I felt was peace. A quiet, settled peace. My past was not an open wound. It was a scar, a testament to the fact that I had been hurt, but I had healed and healed stronger. I didn't reply to the email. Not yet. Maybe one day I would. For now, I just slipped the phone back into my pocket, took a deep breath of the free, open air, and smiled. They say you can't choose your family. But maybe the truth is, you can. You just have to be brave enough to draw the plans yourself.